This is for Show Me Unit 2. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about the concepts of it. So first I'm going to start off with talking about bone. There's different kinds of bone. So spongy bone is the porous stuff that is like in the middle of the bone, and the compact bone is the hard stuff that encases it. And there's also endochondral and dermal bones. So endochondral bones, those start with a cartilaginous model and then they ossify. And dermal bones, they do not have a cartilaginous model. It's mostly just ossified mesoderm. And there's osteoclast and osteoblasm bones. So osteoclast, those break down bones, and osteoblast, those build up bones. And with the osteoclast and osteoblast activity, I will start talking about calcium homeostasis. So when the calcium levels in the blood rise, it stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete calcitonin, which then is stimulated to deposit the calcium salt into the bone. But when the calcium levels are falling in the blood, it stimulates the parathyroid hormone to release, it stimulates the parathyroid to release parathyroid hormone, which then increases osteoclast activity, so it can raise the calcium levels in the blood. So there are different parts of the skeleton also. So the axial skeleton, which is this side, that contains the notochord, vertebral column, ribs, and sternum. And what ribs are they're just struts that are attached to the vertebrae. And there are three different kinds of ribs. There's true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. True ribs, those attach from the vertebrae directly to the sternum by cartilaginous models. And then false ribs, they look like true ribs, but they're not. They attach to the true ribs by cartilage. And then floating ribs, those do not attach to anything. They just attach to the vertebrae. So the sternum, which is this middle part right here, that is used for muscle and rib attachments. So onto the appendicular skeleton, which is this side. So the appendicular has the girdles and limbs, so arms and legs, and then the pelvic and pectoral girdle. So the pelvic girdle is only endochondral bone, and that is bone articulations. So for example, take this water bottle as an example, and you open it up, and there is, focus, there we go. Pretend this is the acetabulum, which is where the mouth of the water bottle goes, and then this part, the mouth part of the water bottle, is the hip socket. So basically the acetabulum in the hip socket, the acetabulum in the head of the femur would articulate like this, and it would be able to move around. So, and then the pectoral girdle, which is this, that is a muscular sling. And it is made with both endochondral and dermal bone. So for example, so here's some chemistry goggles, and this strap, that would be like the muscular sling holding the bones, which are the actual goggle part of it in place. So for tetrapod limbs, there are three basic regions, which is the stylopodium, which is the one bone, the zygapodium, which is the two bones, and then autopodium, which is many bones, like the carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. And then onto cranial. So cranial is composed of dermatocranium, splanchnoscranium, and chondrocranium. So this is the dermatocranium, and it is made of dermal bones. So there is the facial, orbital, temporal, palatal, and mandibular part. And then the splanchnoscranium is endochondral bone. And then onto the chondrocranium. So the chondrocranium is endochondral bone, and it is the platform that supports the brain, and the main parts of it are the sphenoid bone, occipital bone, and ethmoid bone. So there are animals that have a kinetic skull. So humans do not have a kinetic skull, but there are animals that do, such as fish. And there are different ways of it moving. There's just a hinge, you know, where the whole entire top part of the jaw can unhinge and they can eat food. Otherwise, there's ways that it can move behind the eye, in front of the eye, and then there's just like the bottom jaw. So for an example, there's like an egg-eating snake. And these egg-eating snakes, they use what's called pterygoid walking, where they can move their skull over their prey so that they can eat. And another example is a fish. So fish suction feed. So they open their mouth so fast and it pulls the pressure back in and their food goes into their mouth. And I'm going to move on to paired fins. So for paired fins, why should something need paired fins? So here's a shark. It's got paired fins. So why would an animal need paired fins? Well, it's beneficial for them because paired fins allow them to steer, and it helps them balance, and it helps with motion and everything. Because, for example, a lamprey, it does not have paired fins. It just has the dorsal and caudal fins. And when this lamprey needs to, for example, turn a corner, it has to very erratically move so that it can actually get from point A to point B, or turn or move up and down in the water. And then some key topics to touch on. So how did vertebrae change from early vertebrae to tetrapods and mammals? So early vertebrae, they such as agnathians, they had mostly notochord with muscle attachments. So basically a hot glue stick with muscles. And then the vertebrae that did form in primitive fish contained dorsal and ventral arches, and the vertebral elements remained separated, which is aspidospondyl, and there was no centra. So this would be an early vertebrae. So it's detached, it's not fused. And then this would kind of be an example of an early vertebrae. Just take this necklace as an example if it focuses. But there's just well, it doesn't want to do that. But there's a string and there's beads attached to it. But the string would be the notochord, and then the beads would be like the vertebrae. So in the derived fishes, there were enlarged elements around the notochord, but in tetrapods, there was one centrum from the inner centrum or plurocentrum in amniotes, and there were zygapophyses which kept the vertebrae from twisting too far and causing notochord damage. So, for example, in this one, and it doesn't want to focus. Hello. But, okay, whatever. So, we'll pretend that these are fused and these are closer together. What would happen is they would articulate better, and the zygapophyses would not allow for twisting. Hi, cat. And then there was the reason that the early mammals needed only one centrum from water to land is because on land there is more gravity and less buoyancy, so the spinal column needed more structure. So for example, let's take this tape as an example. So we'll pretend that each of these is a centra. So if an animal was on land and it needed to put pressure on, like these, the centra would slip they would slip on each other, and it would not provide the proper amount of support for the vertebrae. And if it only had one centra with hello, Jeez, okay. If it only had one centra and it had neural spines on it, then it would be able to articulate, and then it would not be able to move around as much, and it would provide more structure and rigidity. So pectoral girdles. So pectoral girdles started out in the fish, and pectoral girdles, they were attached, and then eventually the pectoral girdles detached, such as this, and it created cervical spine. So the dermal bone in this provided attachments for jaws and muscles that connect the axial skeleton with the limbs. And when it got on land, it lost a lot of dermal bones. And what happened was the endochondral bones, those ended up being larger in size and strength. And then in more terrestrial vertebrae, no, that's more terrestrial vertebrae. The terrestrial vertebrae were associated with the loss of dermal bones and, the loss of dermal bones and the increase in size and strength of endochondral bones. And in modern mammals, the scapulocoracoid, changed from the coracoid and it fused to the scapula to make the modern scapula. And the pectoral girdles are held in place by a muscular sling, which is why you can shrug your shoulders, but you can't shrug your pelvis, as we learned in class. And onto the sprawling posture. So how does sprawling posture in tetrapods differ from vertical posture in mammals? So, the sprawling posture involves appendages that are on the ventral side of the body, and they move in an undulating motion. And when an animal's upright, they are allowed to